In what way does your media product use, develop, or challenge forms of conventions of real media products? So I believe my film used many short film conventions, as well as using conventions from the specific genre that Ghost had sat in, which was a psychological thriller. To begin with, short film conventions include no dialogue, only a few locations used, hardly any characters, an enigma code is constantly introduced, which is when the narrative is constantly confusing us, the audience throughout the film. My film does use a few of these conventions. There are hardly any characters in the whole entire film. We see 3 characters and that's it. You'd really consider this film to be suited as a short film because of this being a very basic story, and having 3 characters won't also confuse the audience as much, considering the time they have to watch the whole film. It's not long enough. The story I had to produce in a short film realistically only needed 3 characters, and each played pivotal roles. It was easy to remember the names of these characters too, one being Grace, the other being Ryan, and of course the final character being Grace's mum. Still, these 3 characters, I feel I created a large theme of suspense. I also used the convention of having this enigma code being used throughout the whole film. I tried my best to confuse the audience using this very intimidating music to create the suspense, as if something was going to happen to Grace. Towards the end we see this a lot in the film, with Grace being stitched up on a date as she walks home, the specific camera angles filming her through pieces of twig and pieces of grass in the field. It gets the feeling that there's someone watching her. The enigma code is used a lot. I also believe a last convention that has not been mentioned yet also fits in really well with my film Ghosted. This convention being that a lot of short films come from thinking of an everyday situation and flipping it on its head. So if we take someone going on a date as an example, and then being stitched up, then this is a normal thing that we might see in life. We unfortunately do see this happen quite a lot as well. But the flip side that we experience is when Grace gets home, her mother doesn't even know who she is, and the photograph in the picture frame is now Ryan, the boy she was supposed to see instead of her. It's whatever flips in a situation like this that we're also entertained by and amused by. A strong convention that I've used really well here, I believe. In terms of the actual genre, a psychological thriller has very special features that makes it different to other big genres. A psychological thriller is described as being narratives with domesticated settings in which action is suppressed and where thrills are provided instead via investigations of the psychologies of the principal characters. This is a quote by Peter Hutchings. Psychological thrillers also include really distinguished characters featured. This could be either cause of a disability that they have or just distinguished looks. We also see characters' perceptions in psychological thrillers, so this is usually from camera angles being a point of view shot. Characters also show development in this, and the genre in this genre from a very bad state to a much better state. So at the start of the film they could be in a very worse state scenario, and at the end of the film it could be a better state for the character. There's also plot twists too. Characters threatened with the theme of death or violence, characters face difficult situations in their life too, and audience receiving information about one another in this type of film which one character doesn't even know about. They're all strong conventions of psychological thrillers. Now, my film has featured a lot of these conventions. There's 3 characters, and they're all unique. Both Grace and her mum do share the same gender, but they're both different ages. Grace being a younger adult, and the mother being obviously an older adult. With Ryan, he's a teenaged male, so that alone will put him in a different category to the rest of the characters in the whole film. And I think it's great that these characters do share these features about themselves, as they're easily remembered in the entire film and you won't confuse another character with someone else in the film, which is really helpful as the time is very short in the whole film. So it's great that we do have, characters that do have distinguished looks, due to the time given, of course. I think the film also shows plot twists with Ryan, how bad his life is, Ryan also not showing up on the date, and also the very ending when Grace's own mother doesn't even remember her own daughter. So there's a lot of plot twists. And they're all plot twists that fit in the film and make it a strong psychological thriller, I think. Grace faces difficult situations which are all of these plot twists that I've just mentioned, as she is the protagonist here, being another convention too. And it's all about Grace. I've featured point of view shots at times to show her perception being tested due to Ryan or her looking around in disbelief as she is upset about specific events happening around her. So her point of view used a lot and are shown with these point of view shots. I've deliberately done that as well to make it all around her life as well. This is where we see the film and the audience can say to themselves that this is a psychological thriller. This is making it obvious to the audience now that they are watching a psychological thriller here. If you watch the others, for instance, then you realise that right at the end of the whole film, the family is actually dead, and that's the massive plot twist too, which you didn't see coming in a way. It's a film that's also a psychological thriller, falls along this genre, and it's common for films to accomplish this, though. In relation to narrative theory here too, I'm really bad at this, Tesfatan Todorov's theory states how all films begin with this equilibrium, something that is going to happen in which we can see, and usually at the start of the film what he's stating here that things are good, this is a good and nice equilibrium for all the characters in the film. Then, however, we then encounter an issue in time. The equilibrium is being disrupted. Then there's a solution to this though, and things go back to more or less happy, but still things aren't the same. Everyone must work together or something has to be done in preparation for the fourth and final stage for Todorov's theory, where we see a prevention and a fighting back, so to speak. We're then left with the final stage, where things are all good again. However, I have to ask you, are things left good and in a natural environment right in the end of my film? It's an argumentative point, but I believe it isn't. Therefore, my film is challenging this narrative theory that Todorov set out because of these plot twists. All psychological thrillers never really leave on good terms, though. The others I've said about, for instance, right at The Sixth Sense, he realises he is dead, and obviously it's not so much the same in my film, but right at the end of the film, Grace realises her mum doesn't remember her anymore. We don't see a final stage where Grace's mum knows who she is. So, am I using a normal convention for my genre where we witness a plot twist? Yes, and that is usually at the end. But am I using Todorov's popular and common theory in films? No, I'm certainly challenging this. In Ghosted, I've also had the pleasure of trying to challenge these conventions, whether it's the genre itself or the actual conventions of short films. Starting with its short film conventions, I wanted to use a lot of dialogue in Ghosted. I must admit, I believe a lot of the time it's just visual moving images, but I do think there's also dialogue shown a lot of the time in the film. This is shown a lot when the two are on the date, for example. I actually thought a normal convention that people create on a date is dialogue. A couple on a date do talk a lot, so that this had to be added in Ghosted, as the two talks quite a lot to purposely show that they're on a date at a restaurant. Secondly, I think I've also really challenged a normal short film convention, as the characters are featured in a lot of locations too, especially Grace being the protagonist. Locations featured for Grace: the house, outside in various spots, whether this would be Grace walking on a road or on a pathway. There's also the restaurant and Grace's mum's car too. They're all locations in the entire film, so I've definitely challenged this here too. I think I needed these locations just to create suspense. It may confuse the audience at different times as they think in thought as to where Grace may be, but I also believe this helps with the actual suspense. Needed, of course, in a psychological thriller. I mean, like Alfred Hitchcock said, there is no terror in a bang, only in the anticipation for it, which basically notes how valuable time is for any film, and that has to consume such a high level of anticipation too. I felt mine did actually need this level of anticipation right at the end of the film for the big flip side of the narrative. So by having such a large number of locations featured in the short film did actually challenge a usual short film convention. But in my own point of view, it helped because of the tension created, as there's such a big journey that Grace has to walk to return home after her own date failed. However, any other short film convention, I think, has been perfectly used. We've also got my own genre conventions. There are conventions of psychological thrillers, and there has been only a few actually challenged. So characters see a development through the film, where things for them are very good to begin with, and them themselves are in a great state. This is true, and the film is in this genre like the others, shows protagonists like Grace Stewart, a woman who thinks she's alive in this huge house, and the noises made unexpectedly are perhaps ghosts, as she's much to believe that her house is haunted, so to say. Although at the end of the film, obviously, she then figures out that she and the rest of the family are dead and they are the ghosts. So this shows how the development for her was always bad the whole entire time, and there was no point in the film where the state of the characters was actually at a good level. In Ghosted, Grace, the main protagonist, is in a great state at the start of the film, as she begins to fall in love with this boy called Ryan, who she meets online. It's almost as if you are believed that this film is supposedly in the romance genre to begin with, but when we get towards the ending of the film, we witness this character in a worse state of mind, and she's thrown with confusion and pain emotionally. I've certainly attempted to challenge this convention, but also staying far on the guidelines of features that make a psychological thriller too. Like genre theorist Henry Jenkins believed that genre constantly breaks rules. It's okay to challenge these genre conventions, and it's okay to go out the barrier sometimes, because that introduces new conventions for that particular genre. There's a theme in psychological thrillers that we should be given information as such to know about another character. So, for instance, we know this certain information about this character that may put them in threat if they don't know. And that's kind of the thing that we do see a lot in these genres. These films in these genres, sorry. It's usually information about the protagonist. This information is for us to know and will be made to feel guilty about it. In addition, this information usually involves knowing that he or she is the killer, so another character is to be thrown in the deep end of them being the one in the danger. This example can be seen in Alfred Hitchcock's film Psycho. We, as the audience, capture Norman Bates, the owner of the hotel, struggling with his own emotions, making him the psycho. At this point, the anticipation begins to rise as we begin to assume that something may happen to Marion, who is the main protagonist in the film, and something does when Marion is murdered whilst taking a shower, of course. Later on in the film, we see Marion's sister, Lila, inquiring where Marion has gone. She confronts Norman, and it's at this point when the audience will feel guilty as to knowing that Norman is a murderer and has killed Marion. I can't think of a time that the film suggests this to the audience, so I'd certainly challenge this, I think. I think everything is open, and the information that we don't know about is because we don't know about, because that creates suspense towards right at the end. So we don't know that Ryan is playing Grace the whole time, when right at the end we see the picture of him and we realise what the hell just happened. It's that kind of thing. I'm confident that from the very first second of the film, the audience are setting foot into Grace's perception and thoughts and no one else's. We never realised that Ryan would ever stitch Grace up on a date, where in the eyes of a psychological thriller, I believe the audience should have this information revealed that Grace would be ditched. It's sad to say, but this information isn't revealed at all in the entire film, so it's safe to say that I've challenged this normal convention in the psychological thriller. It's a slight stretch, but psychological thrillers have a trend of showing characters with disabilities too. Mine doesn't show a character with any kind of disability. We do find out that Ryan has struggled in his life, and he finds it hard back home with his own mother. So we do see this struggle of one character, which does relegate him from how strong and well supported Grace's own life is.